Why did they even send her? That was the first question no one dared to ask aloud. The wind screamed across the Hindu Kush, whipping dust into the sky and rattling the thin walls of the remote outpost. It was the kind of wind that carried dread. With it, a living force that could bend bullets, shift clouds, and swallow even the best-laid plans. Every man in the sniper unit knew the truth. The mission was impossible. They had eyes on the target, a high-ranking insurgent leader sheltered inside a fortified village nearly 3 kilometers away. Too far, too chaotic. The man appeared only in flashes, sometimes a shoulder in a window, sometimes just a shadow slipping between walls. 5 seconds of exposure at most, and always when the wind howled hardest. Staff Sergeant Miller, a heavy-set veteran with scarred hands, spat into the dirt after scanning through his scope. "It's suicide," he muttered, loud enough for the younger Private Langley to hear. "At that range, with this weather, you'd be lucky to hit the mountain, let alone a moving man." Langley didn't argue. He had already given up trying. "I don't even see his shadow anymore," he whispered, backing away from the spotting scope. Captain Royce, the team's leader, said nothing. His jaw was set, his eyes fixed on the manila folder that had arrived that morning by helicopter. Inside was only one word, written in block letters: Cole, R. No rank, no history, no clearance, just a blurred photograph. A silhouette on a cliff with a rifle raised. Nothing else. When the Humvee pulled up, no one expected much. Dust swirled around the figure that stepped out. A woman, tall, lean, face wrapped against the wind, no luggage, no entourage, only a long rifle case in one hand and the windlog book in the other. She moved as if the storm around her meant nothing. Each step silent, deliberate. The name tag on her vest read, SGT R. Cole. "Who the hell is this?" "Langley," whispered. Miller shook his head. "No clue, but she's our Hail Mary, I guess." Captain Royce walked forward, extending his hand. "You're Cole?" "Yes, sir." Her voice was calm, almost drowned out by the storm. "You read the situation?" "Yes, sir." "You believe the shot can be made?" Cole flipped open her logbook. Inside were pages of numbers, sketches of the terrain, and rows of wind notations already adjusted for today's conditions. It wasn't theory. It was lived experience, written in the hurried scrawl of someone who trusted instinct more than devices. "I believe," she said softly, "that shots are not impossible, only not yet understood." Royce studied her face, but the goggles hid her eyes. He simply nodded. "Let's get you set up." The command tent went quiet when she entered. Sniper units were families of their own, built on shared scars, trust, and reputations earned across deployments. Raina Cole had none, at least none that anyone knew of. "What's her specialty?" Langley muttered to the team's tech, Thompson. "She doesn't have a file, nothing I can access, just black bars." He lowered his voice. Even her name, Ghost Hawk, came from a rumor, not a record. The nickname lingered in the air, Ghost Hawk. Raina opened her rifle case and began assembling the weapon. Not standard issue, not even close. The barrel was long and weather-worn. The scope carved with a lens cut none of them recognized. The grip had been sanded smooth, as though she valued touch more than finish. The firing pin looked handmade, shaped by hands that understood steel. In a way factories never could. She worked silently. No explanation, no boasting, just assembly. Then she went outside, the others followed, pretending not to stare. She stood at the cliff's edge, threads of colored yarn pinched between her fingers. One by one, she let them go, watching how the wind tossed them into chaos before carrying them down the valley. No devices, no tech, just thread and silence. When she finally lay prone on the ridge, she seemed to merge with the earth itself. Still as stone, Miller crossed his arms. "Who's spotting for her?" "Not you," Royce answered. "What do you mean, not me?" "She doesn't want a spotter, no interference, just silence." Miller grunted. shaking his head. Fine. We'll just sit back and watch a miracle then. Time passed. 10 minutes. 20. The target appeared briefly in a window. Fabric flickering in the storm. She didn't fire. 30 minutes, nothing. An hour. Still nothing. Langley whispered, "She's frozen. She'll never take it." But Captain Royce wasn't watching the target. He was watching her breathing. Slow, steady, deliberate. She wasn't frozen. She was waiting. Another flicker in the window. This time, her finger twitched almost imperceptibly, a faint mechanical. Click, no bang, no flash, no recoil. Just silence. The men looked at each other in confusion. Did she fire? Miller asked. Before anyone could answer, the radio crackled. Confirmed. Target down. Every head turned to Raina Cole. She was already standing, rifle slung over her shoulder. That was it? Langley stammered. Raina gave the smallest nod. Impact confirmed. Then she walked away. The outpost buzzed with whispers, but even the generators seemed muted in the aftermath. They'd all seen kills before, plenty, but never like that. No sound, no signature. Just a life ended from nearly 3 kilometers away in a storm zone. Through a window the size of a shoebox, she made it look routine. Later that night, while others ate in the mess tent, Raina sat alone with her logbook, scribbling figures by lantern light. Not basking in victory, not explaining, just working. Langley couldn't hold his frustration. She doesn't even use elevation maps. How does she? She doesn't need to, Miller interrupted. I watched her trace the mountain slope with a pencil. She feels the shot. That's not a strategy. Miller leaned closer. It is if it works every time. Captain Royce stepped in, folder in hand. A new assignment, another target. Another chance to test the woman they barely understood. But the rules had already shifted. The mission was no longer judged by technology or by feasibility. It was judged by one thing. Only whether Ghost Hawk said it could be done. Why didn't she take the shot the first time? That question haunted the team long after the confirmation came through. The outpost should have been buzzing with relief. An impossible target had been neutralized. But instead, the silence that followed was heavier than the storm itself. It wasn't the enemy they were thinking about. It was her, Raina Cole, Ghost Hawk. As Whispers already named her, sat alone by the tent flap, notebook in hand, rifle beside her like it was just another tool of trade. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't even resting. She was writing. Captain Royce entered quietly, folder in hand. The men looked up, weary eyes searching for some measure of reassurance. Royce didn't give it. He knew the war wasn't pausing. For them, another target, he said simply. The folder landed on the table with a dull slap. The men leaned in. Satellite images, weather data, movement patterns. This one was different. Not just harder, worse. A successor had stepped into the dead man's place. Higher rank. He moved between safe houses under heavier guard. Most of the time he stayed, buried inside, shielded by walls. His only exposure came when he crossed a narrow 10-foot alley between 2 buildings. 3 seconds, maybe 4. That was all the window. And the wind was even worse than yesterday. Langley rubbed his temples. 3 seconds in this wind? Sir, it's fantasy, Miller grunted. Body armor too. Even if she hits, it might not land clean. The tent filled with murmurs. Thompson, the tech, pulled up drone data, showing gusts slamming unpredictably through the valley. Crosswind. We'll shove a bullet 5 feet off course at that range. Maybe more. All of them turned toward Raina. She hadn't looked up from her notebook. She was already scribbling, pen moving steadily. Royce cleared his throat. Well? Still without looking up, she spoke. Cliffside. Crosswind. No deflection protection. 1 chance per hour. Langley frowned. 1 chance? In a whole hour? Raina finally raised her eyes, calm and unreadable. Yes, that's how the wind allows it. Her tone wasn't arrogant. It wasn't even firm. It was simply factual, as though the wind itself had briefed her. Royce gave the order. Prepare positions. Outside. The cold bit harder than before. The valley seemed to groan under the weather. The men checked ear, calibrated scopes, adjusted comms lines. Drones staggered in the sky. Barely keeping stable, Raina worked differently. She tied strips of fabric to thin branches, letting them flutter like signals only she could read. She paced out lines in the snow, feeling the incline with her boots. She let the air hit her cheekbones, eyes half closed, as if listening. Primitive, almost ritualistic. Langley shook his head. She looks like a witch, Miller answered. She looks like someone who doesn't need our gadgets. Back inside the tent, the debate raged. She's good. I'll give her that, Langley muttered. But this is insane. Even if the bullet reaches him, wind shear alone will curve it off his chest plate. Thompson added. He's not predictable. His walk changes every time. There's no rhythm. Roy silenced them with a look. She doesn't miss. But even he knew this shot would be harder. Faster window, heavier wind, less visibility. That night, while the others rotated sleep shifts, Raina stayed awake. Not restless, not anxious, just working. By lantern light, she drew the village layout from memory, noting windows, shadow angles, air currents that shifted hour by hour. She tracked how moonlight moved across rooftops. She wasn't just studying the enemy. She was studying the air. By dawn, she had filled 2 more pages of calculations, arrows, and strange symbols that looked less like math and more like music notes. When the team woke, they found her already at the ridge, prone, rifle aligned. The wait began. Minutes stretched into hours. Finally, a flicker. The target moved. 3 seconds in the open, Langley's heart jumped. That's it. But Raina didn't pull the trigger. The target disappeared again. Langley whispered furiously. She missed it. That was the window. No, Royce said quietly. He was watching her breathing. That was the wrong wind. Another hour passed. The cold deepened. At precisely 14:37 hours, the wind shifted, slight, subtle. Only she noticed. Her fingers adjusted the elevation dial on the scope, not with calculation, but with instinct. Another flicker. The target stepped into the gap. Her breathing slowed. 1 second. 2. 3. A faint click, no bang, no recoil, no sound. Silence. 30 seconds later, the radio crackled. Confirmed. Target neutralized. The men froze. Langley blinked, whispering. But I didn't even see her hand move. Raina lifted her head slowly from the scope, unscrewing it with calm precision. Royce broke the silence. What's your method? No digital readouts, no spotter. Nothing. How are you doing it? She swung her rifle, eyes still steady. Wind speaks. You listen. Then she walked back into the tent, notebook under her arm, as if nothing had happened. That night, no one laughed. In the mess tent, no one doubted. No one mocked. They weren't just watching a sniper anymore. They were watching a myth being born. And in the stillness that followed, a new truth sank into the men's bones. This war was no longer theirs. It belonged to the woman who could shoot the wind. Why didn't she celebrate? That question lingered louder than the gunfire that never came. Most soldiers cheered after an impossible mission. They found release in jokes, in food, in the reckless laughter that always covered the weight of survival. But Raina Cole never laughed, never cheered. After her second kill, she simply sat in silence, pen scratching across her notebook, like the war outside was nothing more than an equation waiting to be solved. In the mess tent, Langley stirred his instant coffee with shaky hands. He hadn't touched food since morning. I don't get it, he muttered. She doesn't even check maps. She doesn't look at drone feeds. It's like she already knows where the bullet's going before she pulls the trigger. Miller leaned forward, elbows heavy on the table. She doesn't need to check. I saw her sketch the slope of the mountain by hand yesterday. No GPS, no formulas, just a pencil and memory. She's not guessing, she's feeling it. Langley shook his head. That's not a strategy. That's insanity. But Captain Royce walked in before the argument could grow, folder in hand. The way he carried it, like it weighed more than just paper, silenced everyone. He dropped it onto the table. New target. The men exchanged weary looks. A third? Already? Royce's voice was steady. This one's different, harder. A regional logistics coordinator. Ghost himself. No phone, no trace. Moves by night. Never repeats a route. Thompson frowned, scanning the satellite frames. How do we even know? It's him? Royce tapped a photo. Accident. Drone caught a reflection. Window flash revealed a silhouette. That's all we've got. That. And the fact that if he disappears again, he'll vanish for good. Langley pushed the folder away. Sir, come on. That's suicide. He's buried behind cliffs. The only line of sight is through reflected glass. You'd need a shot before noon or thermals will throw it off completely. Royce didn't answer him. He was watching Raina. She was still in the corner, notebook open, pencil moving without pause. Cole, Royce said finally, what's your read? She didn't lift her head. She just spoke quietly, almost to herself. Cliffside, crosswind, needs a dropped correction before noon. One chance. Miller blinked. Why before noon? This time she looked up, eyes calm beneath her dark goggles. Afternoon, the thermals rise, the bullet dances. The room fell silent. Langley leaned back, defeated. She's not even human. But Raina was already checking her rifle, unscrewing bolts, cleaning metal. Her stillness was unnerving. Not just the absence of fear, but the absence of expectation. She wasn't preparing for glory. She was preparing for inevitability. By dawn, the ridge was cold enough to crack skin. The wind lashed across rock, cutting through layers of fabric. Raina lay prone, motionless, her breathing synced with the rhythm of the gusts. She hadn't moved. In 40 minutes, behind her, the sniper team crouched at secondary posts, scopes and drones in hand, their bodies tense. They were ready. She was still. Royce crouched behind, whispering updates into her earpiece. Thermals rising in an hour. After that, the shot's impossible, she whispered back, voice steady. Understood. Minutes crawled. Shadows lengthened. Then, a flicker. Sunlight caught the broken window. And for a breath, the target appeared. Silhouette lit like a figure. In stained glass, take it. Royce hissed, but she didn't fire. 3 seconds. 4. Then the target disappeared. Langley slammed his fist into the dirt. That was it. She had it. Raina stayed still, scope steady. Only her lips moved. The wind dipped. The what? Langley snapped. The gust dropped in the last second. She whispered. The bullet would have lost altitude. I would have missed. Royce's chest tightened. She had let the shot go, deliberately. Better no shot than a failed one. Minutes dragged, then 30. Then another flicker of motion. The silhouette moved again. The wind shifted, sharper this time, cutting through the valley. Her finger twitched. Not fast, not desperate. Just certain. A faint click. No bang. No plume of dust. No sound at all. The silence stretched until 30 seconds later, the radio crackled. Target down. Confirmed single shot. No audio signature. The men froze. Langley stared at her. I didn't even see your hand move. Raina lifted her head, unscrewing the scope, her face unreadable. Trajectory changed. Had to aim 1 inch lower. Royce stepped closer. You saved the mission. She looked at him, calm and steady. I waited for the moment. That's the mission. Then, as always, she packed her gear and walked away. The others watched her go, the truth sinking deeper with every step. She wasn't just making impossible shots. She was rewriting the rules of what it meant to pull a trigger. That night, Royce found her at the edge of the cliff. watching stars appear. Over the valley, he lowered himself beside her, offering a thermos. She accepted but didn't drink. "You know," he began, his voice softer than he expected. "On my first deployment, we had a sniper in Fallujah. He could hit a man through a tire at 500 meters. Never missed. One day he did. Just once, the guy survived, set a bomb 3 days later, killed half a convoy. That one miss broke him. He never picked up a rifle again." Raina said nothing. Eyes fixed on the horizon, Royce exhaled slowly. "You've never missed, have you?" She hesitated. "Not on mission." A pause. "Off mission?" "Once." He didn't press. He knew some stories only lived in silence. But her words stayed with him long after she walked back to her tent. A bullet is a decision, and Raina Cole had decided something most of them had never even thought about. It wasn't about where you shoot. It was about why. Why did she never speak about herself? That silence was its own mystery. Around the outpost, rumors had already grown larger than life. Some called her Ghost Hawk. Others whispered that she was a myth sent by command to intimidate even their own men. Yet in truth, Raina Cole had once been as ordinary as any of them. Quiet, overlooked. A girl who belonged to dust and silence long before the army found her. Before she was Ghost Hawk, she was just Raina. She grew up in southern Texas, where the horizon stretched wide and endless. Horses grazed in pastures, dust clung to the wind, and coyotes sang in the distance at night. Her grandfather, a retired Marine, was the one who placed a rifle in her hands before she had even learned how to braid her own hair. Not just aim and fire, he would tell her, his voice gravelly but steady. The rifle isn't your weapon, stillness is. They didn't train at a range. There were no paper targets with red circles. Her lessons came from fence posts with tin cans balanced on top, or prairie dogs that popped out of the dirt to chew up the fields. She would lie in the grass, face pressed against the earth, waiting for the wind to settle. Minutes became hours. She didn't fidget. She didn't complain. If she missed, she didn't pout. She simply reloaded and tried again, quietly, patiently. By her teenage years, she was winning small-town shooting competitions. Men twice her age muttered excuses about faulty sights and bad luck. But she never gloated. She didn't even linger to accept applause. She would pack up her rifle, nod politely, and slip away before the crowd's noise could reach her. That silence became her armor. When she enlisted, the army didn't quite know what to make of her. At Fort Benning, she didn't laugh in barracks or bark orders during training. She rarely spoke at all. While others bragged about scores or scrolled through phones, Raina filled notebooks with sketches of terrain and strange formulas about wind. Her instructors grew frustrated at first. "Cole," one barked, "snipers work in teams. You can't stay in your own head forever." But then the live-fire qualifications came. Rain, mud, hills that bent the knees of even the strongest. Candidates missed left and right. Scopes fogged, hands shook. But Raina never blinked. She adjusted without hesitation, firing calmly, breathing in rhythm with the air itself. One final exercise sealed her place. A staged hostage rescue across a ravine, a moving headshot, something no candidate had ever hit cleanly. Raina took the shot once and only once. The evaluators double-checked the target, convinced it was rigged. But it wasn't. It was simply hers. After that, her path changed. Elite assignments, black site operations. Missions so redacted that even her name vanished from records. Instructors began calling her the Quiet Hurricane. Not because she shouted, but because once she moved, nothing stood in her way. And yet, despite all the secrecy, she never changed. She never sought medals, never joined teams for beers, never left a digital footprint. She simply worked, notebook after notebook, equation after equation, back in the present. After her third impossible kill, the men finally stopped questioning whether she was real. They had seen her do the impossible not once, not twice, but 3 times, Langley whispered over cold coffee. It's like she pulls death out of thin air. Miller shook his head. No. It's like she listens until the air tells her when to fire. The truth was more unnerving. She wasn't just calculating. She was waiting, restraining, refusing to pull the trigger until every variable aligned. Royce watched her quietly as she cleaned her rifle, each movement meticulous, precise, unhurried. He recognized something he had almost forgotten in himself. Discipline, the kind born not of rules, but of conviction. When the next folder came, another target buried deep, shielded by cliffs and reflected glass. Royce didn't decide the mission. He asked her. Cole, he said, holding the file. What'd you read? She studied the photo once, memorized the angles in seconds. Then she spoke. Needs a straight drop to correct wind pull. Shot can only be made before noon. Langley frowned. How can you even know that already? She turned to him, voice low. Because after noon, the thermals rise, the bullet dances. Silence followed, the kind that settled not just in the tent, but in the men themselves. From then on, the protocol shifted. They didn't ask if the mission was possible. They asked if Ghost Hawk believed it was act on. When the valley was quiet enough to hear distant stones shift, she lay prone again, rifle pressed to her cheek, her eye fixed to the scope, one hand on the windage knob, the other steady against the cold rock. Royce crouched beside her, whispering. Updates. He'll show. Sun's coming over the ridge. 5 minutes. Raina didn't move. Langley whispered to Miller from behind. She hasn't even adjusted her bipod. She is the bipod, Miller muttered. They fell silent. The world narrowed to a single breath. Then it happened. A flicker of light. A shadow in the window. Royce's voice tightened. There. Take it. Her finger didn't move. 4 seconds. Then the shadow was gone. Langley swore under his breath. She missed it again. But Royce saw her eyes. Unblinking, focused, listening. The wind had shifted. Too sharp. Too sudden. She had let it pass. Minutes stretched. Another flicker. This time, she moved. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just certain. A faint click. No flash. No sound. 30 seconds later, the radio confirmed, target down. Langley slumped back against the rock. I don't even understand what I'm watching anymore. Miller's voice was softer. You're watching the difference between someone who shoots and someone who listens. That night, while the men slept, Raina sat again at the cliff's edge, notebook open. She wasn't writing equations this time. She was sketching. Royce approached. Kneeling beside her, he expected terrain maps. But it wasn't mountains, it wasn't wind arcs. It was a face, a child's face. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. Some truths weren't his to carry. Instead, he watched as she turned the page, returning to her equations, scribbles, arrows, marks that looked more like music than math. And, for the first time, Royce wondered if she was chasing more than just a perfect shot. Maybe she was chasing silence itself. Why were the enemy changing their patterns? The answer came not from intelligence reports, but from whispers carried on intercepted radios. The first insurgent leader had been eliminated in silence. The second had fallen in a narrow gap, body collapsing before his guards even realized. The third had dropped cleanly, struck down as though the air itself had chosen him. No sound, no flash, no trace. Now, in villages across the valley, warnings were spreading faster than orders. Don't stand by windows. Don't silhouette against glass. Cover your movements, eyed in stone. They called her something different in every language. The ghost, the wind hunter, the shadow with no echo. But among her own team, she was just Raina. After her third impossible shot, the mess tent was heavier than ever, not with doubt anymore, but with awe. The men whispered over their meals, trying to make sense of what they had witnessed. Langley leaned forward, voice low. She doesn't even check the elevation maps. I don't understand it. How can she keep landing these shots without tech? Miller shook his head. Because she doesn't need to. I saw her yesterday, tracing the slope of the mountain with a pencil. She's feeling the shot, not reading it. That's not science, Langley argued. Miller smirked faintly. It is if it works every time. Royce walked in, another folder in his hand. He set it down slowly, as if reluctant to release its weight. The men didn't need to ask. They already knew another target, another mission. But this time, Royce hesitated. He looked not at his men, but at Raina, sitting in the corner with her notebook. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge the attention. But they all knew the truth now. This mission would only happen if she said yes. Cole, Royce called softly. She rose, stepped forward, and scanned the file. Her eyes traced the angles, the sketches, the range. Finally, she spoke. Cliffside. Crosswind, shot only possible before noon. Why before noon? Langley asked, though he knew the answer, because after noon, the thermals rise, the bullet dances. Royce nodded once. That was enough. The morning came cold and merciless. Raina lay prone on the ridge, the sun cresting slowly behind her. The men crouched at their posts, every scope aligned, every drone buzzing faintly overhead. But even their most advanced tech couldn't promise what she promised. Silence. They watched her, waiting, listening. Royce whispered updates in her ear. Target expected in 5 minutes. Shadows moving. This will be the window. Her breathing never faltered. Her fingers adjusted the scope, as though her skin alone could read the wind. Then it happened, a flicker of light. The target stepped forward, framed by the morning sun. Take it. Royce urged, but she didn't move. Seconds passed. The shadow vanished. Langley cursed under his breath. She let it go again. Royce said nothing. He was watching her stillness. Then the wind shifted. Subtle, sharp. She adjusted her rifle, not with math, but with instinct. Another flicker. Another chance. Her finger twitched. A faint click, silence. 30 seconds later, confirmation came. Target down. Clean impact. Langley slumped against the rock, shaking his head. She doesn't even shoot like us, She waits, like the wind has to ask her permission. Miller whispered. No, like she asked the winds. Back at the tent, while others processed what had happened, Raina sat alone, notebook open, pen moving. Langley, unable to resist, asked, What are you even writing in there? It doesn't look like numbers. She glanced at him once, then back at the page. No answer. Later that night, when Langley finally stole a peek at her logbook, he found not equations but rhythms. Scribbles, arrows, circles, notes that looked more like music than math. He closed it quickly, unsettled. She doesn't measure the wind, he whispered to Miller. She hears it, but in truth. Her silence reached further than they knew. By nightfall, analysts in 2 continents were reviewing her missions. Reports marked Asset GH9 spread across Pentagon briefings. Generals frowned at redacted pages, whispering about a sniper who made death invisible. If she goes rogue, one muttered, we'll never find her. Another leaned forward. She's not rogue material. No ego, no attachments, no digital footprint. That's what makes her dangerous. And in enemy camps, radios crackled. With panic, don't walk near windows, don't cross open ground, don't trust the air. Because somewhere in the mountains, Ghost Hawk was listening. At the outpost, the men began to shift. Their doubt was gone, replaced now by reverence. They no longer asked if a mission could be done. They only asked if she would accept it. And every time she lay down, prone against the rock, the world seemed to hold its breath, not in fear, but in respect for the stillness. That night, Royce found her again at the cliff's edge. She was sketching something different this time. Not wind, not terrain, a face, a child's face. Family? He asked softly. No? Memory? She nodded once, then turned the page, returning to her rhythm of numbers and arcs. Royce didn't press. He didn't need to. Some ghosts carried themselves. But he realized something in that moment. Her silence wasn't emptiness. It was weight. Every choice, every shot, carried something no one else could see, and that weight was what made her deadly. The next morning, orders came down for extraction. The team had completed their objectives. Relief rippled quietly across the men. They began cleaning gear, trading small jokes, talking of home. But Raina was already gone. No convoy, no flight. Manifest, no briefing, just a note pinned to the tent wall. Wind is favorable. Target will fall. Don't wait for confirmation. Royce folded it into his vest. Staring at the cliff where she had last sat. She's already gone, he said quietly. And somewhere, across another border, Raina Cole was listening to the wind again. Waiting for silence, waiting for her moment. Why would command send her into a city? That was the question that rattled even Royce when the folder arrived. The mountains had given her cover. The storm had given her silence. But the city was different. The city was noise, constant and chaotic. Cameras on every corner. Drones disguised as traffic monitors. Crowds that shifted like tides in the Hindu Kush. Raina Cole had been invisible because no one was watching for her. In a city, everyone watched everything. And yet, that was exactly why they sent her. The target was not just another insurgent. He was a war criminal turned political figure, protected by the illusion of legitimacy, shielded by bodyguards, armored convoys, and the press. He walked through plazas surrounded by glass towers and marble walkways. A man who believed daylight was his armor. The mission parameters were merciless. No collateral damage, no panic, no trace. The shot had to be surgical, invisible, even in the most visible place on Earth. Royce had read the file twice before handing it to her. He studied her face as she scanned it, waiting for some flicker of hesitation. But Raina simply closed the folder and said, "I'll need 37 hours and a quieter rifle." She didn't ask about extraction, didn't ask about surveillance grids, didn't ask about support. She only asked for silence. 3 days before the scheduled strike, she was already in the city. She moved through crowded streets in an oversized construction vest, tinted goggles masking her eyes. Her rifle was disassembled into parts that looked like tools. Her logbook was disguised as safety schematics. No one stopped her. No one noticed her. That was her first weapon. Being ordinary. She climbed 30 floors in a half-abandoned office building across from the plaza. At the top, she lay flat in an unfinished conference room with glass walls. From here, she had the vantage point. But she didn't set up the rifle yet. She never rushed. Instead, she watched. At 10:40 a.m., the plaza filled with schoolchildren and tourists. Guides waved. Flags, cameras flashed. Drones buzzed lazily above. At 11:50, the crowd swelled tighter. Bodyguards began rehearsing their patterns. And at 12:08, something remarkable happened. The plaza hushed. Not fully, but enough. Tour guides paused to reset their groups. Drones repositioned. Even the fountains slowed for scheduled maintenance cycles. For roughly 3 minutes, the chaos dipped into calm. That was her window. She marked it in her notebook. Not with numbers, with rhythm. Every day, for 2 more days, she returned to the building. She watched. She studied reflections on glass. The flutter of pigeons. Even the way wind tunneled between skyscrapers. She released chalk dust from a balloon and tracked its path through the towers. She memorized every variable. And she still never assembled her rifle. The men at the outpost didn't know where she was. They had no updates, no GPS signals, just silence. Royce pretended not to care, but he carried her note folded against his chest, like it was both a burden and a promise. On the 3rd day, the convoy arrived. The plaza swelled with people, security tightened. The middle-aged man stepped out of the armored car, waving to the crowd with casual arrogance. He believed daylight made him untouchable. Raina lay flat against cold concrete, cheek pressed to metal. She hadn't breathed in nearly 10 seconds. The sun flashed across mirrored windows, creating a 3-second blind spot in every security camera. Her finger moved, just a fraction. There was no sound, no flash. 1.6 seconds later, the man collapsed as though bowing in prayer. No blood, no scream. Just silence, followed by confusion. Tourists gasped, guards shouted, children clutched parents' arms. But no one saw a shooter, no one saw a weapon. By the time panic rippled through the square, Raina had already disassembled the rifle, tucked the parts into her vest, and was walking calmly toward the stairwell. In less than 4 minutes, she was gone, across the world. Secure channels erupted. Target is down, confirmed. Where's the shooter? Negative, no visual, no trace. But there was no answer. Not from her. Hours later, a single line of code entered a Black Ops terminal. Asset GH9, Operation Fulcrum. Status: undetected. 1 shot, 1 kill. Back at the mountain outpost. Royce. Read the transmission in silence. Miller leaned over his shoulder, muttering, "That's God level." Langley shook his head. "No, that's Raina. In the city, conspiracy theories began before nightfall. News channels replayed shaky footage. Some claimed the man had collapsed from a stroke. Others swore they heard a gunshot. Though none had been recorded, videos blurred. Witnesses contradicted each other, but in military briefings, the truth was already sealed under layers of black ink. Only Royce's team knew what had really happened, and only Royce carried the weight of knowing she had walked into the heart of visibility and still vanished into silence. That night, she sat alone in a rented room, notebook open, but she wasn't sketching buildings or wind arcs this time. She was sketching waves, the patterns of water and storm currents. Her handler asked her later why. She answered without looking up. Because if they try to sabotage the rigs, they'll do it during the storm. The man blinked. "You want to be there?" "No," she said softly. "I want to already be there." And so it shifted again. Raina Cole was no longer just a ghost of mountains and deserts. She was moving into storms, into oceans, into places where even the earth itself seemed to test her silence. But no matter where she went, one truth remained. When she aimed her rifle, the world itself held its breath, not because of fear, but because it respected the stillness. Why would anyone stay on an oil rig during a hurricane? That was the question that made even hardened intelligence officers shift uneasily in their seats. The Gulf Coast storm had been forecast for weeks, Category 4, winds strong enough to twist steel, rain heavy enough to swallow whole platforms. Every rig had been evacuated except one, officially listed as under maintenance. But the intel said otherwise. Satellites picked up chatter. Intercepted transmissions hinted at a mercenary group funded by an exiled billionaire, planning to use the storm as cover. Their goal was not maintenance. It was sabotage, a detonation. Hidden as disaster, a manufactured energy crisis, and someone was already there, waiting. Raina Cole. She hadn't waited for orders this time. She had requested the assignment herself. Though request wasn't the right word, she had simply told them, "That's where they'll strike." She'd arrived disguised as a weather technician 2 days before the storm hit. While the last crew was evacuated, she stayed. No one questioned her. No one looked twice at the quiet woman in the vest, her rifle broken down into metallic components that passed for equipment parts. By the time the eye of the storm approached, she was the only one left aboard. The rig groaned under the weight of wind and rain. Waves slammed its legs with the force of earthquakes. Rain cut sideways, driven by gales that turned air into needles. But Raina Cole was not watching the storm. She was listening inside the hydraulic panel behind the exhaust tower. She lay prone, rifle assembled and wrapped in non-reflective oilskin. Her cheek rested on cold steel. Her breathing slowed, sinking with the sway of the rig. To anyone else, the environment was chaos. To her, it was rhythm. At 12:47 p.m., the false cruise helicopter landed. 6 figures disembarked, faces hidden under masks, movements disguised as maintenance. She already knew where they'd go. She had mapped every corridor, every echo chamber, every blind angle. She had charted how wind funneled through turbine fans, how shadows lengthened across the rig at different spiral turns of the storm. At 12:52, 3 men broke off toward the compressor wing, carrying cases. Too heavy to be tools. The detonation gear. She didn't adjust her scope by numbers. She adjusted by feel. Wind speed. 38 knots, sideways rainfall. Gusts shifting like living creatures. The first man reached for wiring. She fired no blast, no roar. Just a round carried by the storm, bending as though hardened. Slipping into the base of his skull, he collapsed instantly. Drowned by thunder, the second turned. Panic flickered in his body. She had already chambered another round. One blink later, another arc. The bullet rode the gale, struck his temple, and dropped him into a pipe valve. Gas hissed into the storm, masking even the faintest echo. The third froze. He raised his radio, voice cracking with fear. She didn't fire. She let the silence answer. His. Panic became the bullet. He dropped his gear and fled, sprinting toward the helipad. His shouts vanished into wind. The mission was over before it began, within minutes. A drone feed confirmed it. Detonation gear abandoned, team down, rig secure. But no one could explain how. The storm had drowned every sound. Cameras showed only blurred rain. The only evidence left behind was a single bullet embedded in a steel beam. Twisted, not from deflection, but from the way the storm itself had bent its path. Later, when Royce read the report, he muttered under his breath, "She's not a sniper. She's a storm reader." The phrase stuck. Back at the mainland, Langley reviewed audio logs with Miller. Static, wind, thunder, nothing else. Langley whispered, "She stayed through the eye of the storm." Why? Miller asked, because she said the wind had more to teach. Royce handed the sealed report to a Black Ops general. Ghost Hawk neutralized the threat. No casualties, rig intact. The general frowned. She stayed behind during a category. For hurricane? For what? Royce almost smiled. For silence. The general leaned back, muttering, "What does she want in return?" Royce answered simply, "Nothing. Just to be left alone until the wind changes again." Weeks later, whispers of the mission leaked. No official reports, just rumors that a mercenary crew had disappeared in the middle of a hurricane. Some claimed the storm itself had killed them. Others swore they'd been hunted by something unseen. But among the few who knew the truth, there was no debate. It wasn't the storm. It was the silence inside it. And somewhere, Raina Cole was listening still, pen scratching across her notebook, capturing rhythms no one else could hear. The storm had not broken her. It had revealed her. That night, long after the rig was secured, she sat alone on its highest platform, hood pulled low, watching lightning carve the sky. She didn't flinch, didn't shiver. She simply breathed. The storm wasn't her enemy. It was her teacher. And as thunder rolled across the horizon, she whispered something only the wind could hear. The most powerful shot is the one you never have to take. Why did she vanish after the storm? That was the question no one could answer. The oil rig mission was never officially recorded. No medals, no public recognition, no line in any database. To the world, nothing had happened. But those who had seen the reports, those who had whispered about the mercenary team that never returned, understood. A ghost had moved through the storm, and when the winds died, she was gone, back at the mountain outpost. Miller sometimes placed a single bullet on the ledge overlooking the valley. No note, no words. Just a quiet offering to the silence. He never explained why. Langley teased him once. But even he couldn't keep it up. They both knew if she ever returned, they wanted her to know she was remembered. Royce, meanwhile, carried her note in his vest pocket, the one she had left before disappearing into the city mission. Wind is favorable. Target will fall. Don't wait for confirmation. The paper had frayed edges now, worn soft by sweat and time. He told himself it was just a reminder of efficiency, but in truth, it was more. It was the last tangible piece of someone he knew might never walk back through a tent flap again. Command tried to keep control of her myth, branding her only as Asset GH9. Files were locked behind clearance so tight that even generals grumbled about access, but the more they tried to contain her, the faster her legend spread. Soldiers whispered in barracks across continents of a sniper who fired without sound, who could bend bullets through wind, who vanished before anyone could see. Her face, in enemy camps, fear became paranoia. Fighters covered windows, moved only in darkness, refused to silhouette against glass. Entire strategies shifted because of a woman they had never seen. Some swore she could shoot through stone. Others believed she wasn't real at all. But whether ghost or human, they feared her, and that fear itself became a weapon. The Pentagon debated her relentlessly. She's rewriting doctrine. One general muttered, "She's dangerous." Another countered, "Not to us." A CIA officer said quietly, "She doesn't seek power. She seeks silence." But the first general leaned forward, "And if she ever changes her mind?" No one answered, because they all knew the truth. If she ever turned, they wouldn't stop her. No one would, and yet Raina Cole wasn't thinking about power. She wasn't thinking about politics or legends. She was somewhere far from war rooms and outposts, notebook in hand, sketching spirals of wind as though each line was a verse in a song only she could hear. She had learned something few soldiers ever do, that the most powerful weapon wasn't the bullet. It was restraint, the patience to wait until the wind aligned, the discipline to let an opportunity pass if it wasn't the right one, the strength to understand that silence can be more devastating than fire. But even she carried ghosts that night on the rig. When the last mercenary fled into the storm, she had let him live. Some would call it mercy, others weakness. But she didn't see it that way. She knew the truth. Sometimes survival itself is the heaviest burden. That man would wake every day of his life, remembering how silence had chosen not to kill him, and that was a punishment far beyond death. The storm had taught her something else too, that she didn't belong to missions anymore. She belonged to the wind. Months later, a small museum exhibit quietly opened in Virginia. It was labeled Snipers of the Silent War. Among the rifles and uniforms stood a single glass case. Inside was no weapon, no medal, no photograph, only a blank logbook open to a single page. 2 spirals were drawn in pencil, and one word, small, almost hidden, Raina. Visitors often passed it by, thinking it incomplete, but those who knew paused longer, because they understood that the absence itself was the artifact. No gun, no bullet, no proof. Just silence. Royce visited once. He stood in front of the case, hands behind his back, expression unreadable. He didn't stay long. He didn't need to. He already knew what it meant later. He walked out into the cold air and whispered into the wind, "Stillness." Because that was her true weapon. Stillness, not the kind born of fear, but of choice. Not the kind that waits for orders, but the kind that waits for the right moment, even if that moment never comes. In Alaska, some hunters swore they'd seen a woman alone in the forests, carrying a rifle unlike any they'd ever seen. She never stayed long. She never spoke. She just walked, pausing at ridgelines, letting the air move across her cheek before vanishing into the trees again. Others believed she was still in war zones, moving unseen through conflicts no one dared to acknowledge, watching, waiting, listening for the wind. No one knew for sure, and that uncertainty was the final proof of her legend, because legends don't announce themselves. They simply act. And when the world grows loud with war and fear and chaos, sometimes it takes only one breath of silence to change everything. That was Raina Cole's gift. Not the bullet, not the rifle, but the stillness she carried into every battle, and the truth she left behind, that sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.